The Self-Publishing Advice Conference, SelfPubCon 2025, brings indie authors from around the world together for 2 days of insight, inspiration, and connection. It's live online October 18 and 19 and free to attend. Get early access to our international competition and all the latest conference updates at selfpublishingadvice.org/conference-2025. Hello and welcome to Self-Publishing with ALLi, the podcast that brings you all the advice, news, and inspiration an indie author needs today. You're listening to our creative self-publishing stream. It's brought to you by Orna Ross's Go Creative program, helping authors harness the power of creative flow in writing and publishing. And now, here's Orna Ross and Joanna Penn with today's episode.
Welcome to the Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
Hi, Joanna, and hello, everyone.
Yes, and we are back for an update on what we've been doing in our writing and publishing, and we hope what we're going to talk about today is interesting for you all. What we are going to start with today is murdering your darlings, which is one of those things that comes up a lot for authors. But Orna, this is something you have been doing. So talk a bit about what you mean by this.
Yeah, so, we're very familiar with that concept, murdering our darlings in our writing. It's kind of one of those things you learn the minute you learn, take a creative writing course or whatever, that the things you are most attached to and most connected to often have to go in the edit. And what I'm doing at the moment is I'm taking that whole concept of murdering your darlings into my publishing. And it's always there in my writing, but it's helping me at the moment because I'm going through a huge transition in my publishing. I have been for a while. It's a big kind of turnaround for me, and I'm not entirely clear, though I'm becoming clearer, and it's intensifying as I'm going. It began kind of last year, and it began as though I didn't know it when I left X, and then I left Meta, and now I'm thinking of taking an extended break from my Patreon as well, which I've been doing since 2018. And I think the move is from, and I'm talking, by the way, about my own publishing business here, nothing to do with ALLi, which is completely separate. But I think it's a shift really from teaching advice, which is something that I've always embedded in my business, into more just writing and performance. What I'm calling performance, loosely meaning events and live and online. So, and moving also from that requirement for monthly delivery. I've always liked subscription option because, for all the reasons that people do, but I seem to be moving away from that. And it's really kind of scary. So I was all over the place. I knew I wanted to do some things, but I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know why I was doing this. This is very common with me. And so I just kind of made a thing. I am pouring myself onto page or stage, and I mean those very loosely, virtual or real. And then I went back and looked at everything that I was doing, because my problem was I love everything I do, but I was, I want to make certain changes and I can't, because there isn't enough time, there isn't enough me to do all the things I want to do. So now I'm killing not just anything that feels like a drag on my energy, which is something I always would have done, but anything that muddles that particular message, no matter how much I kind of loved doing it. So yeah, murdering my darlings.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said, I love everything I do. This is the problem. And, for people listening, it is easy to give up stuff you hate. So I don't think it was hard for you to particularly give up Meta, for example. And I think about this a lot. It's not hard to give up social media if it's not something you enjoy. But when you love everything you do, that's the difficult thing. I'm just trying to because I've been obviously doing my podcast every week for many years. And whenever I think about taking a break from it, I'm like, but I love it and it's part of my business and it's useful according to my audience. And, so it's really difficult to stop doing things that you feel that you love. And so it's more a sort of question of, as you said, like what underscores the message that we want or the sort of trajectory we're on, or what, I guess the other thing is what makes it into the body of work that we are proud of and that we want to put out into the world. So, for example, I have a lot of ideas about the books I want to write, but I know I don't have time to do all of that. So it's not that I'm murdering them, or I guess I'm murdering them in their cradle. Because they don't fit, and that's another thing.
Termination.
Yeah, exactly. But I think this is what is so hard. So, I mean, I guess you mentioned it's sort of a drag on your energy, but how can people, if they feel like it's really hard to give up anything, like how do people make that decision?
Well, what I did originally was I did 3. I did sort of keep, cocoon, which was like freeze it for a year and maybe go back to it, give myself that soft thing, and then kill. So it was keep, cocoon, or kill. And then I just dropped keep. I know what I'm keeping. I dropped cocoon and I just decided to just go killing. And I also told myself, and this is, it's because it's so hard that you need to take some sort of method. Otherwise, you just go round and round that. I felt I would anyway go round and round that loop forever. And the other thing that helps me is to tell myself that, the measure of how much you love what you're giving up is a measure of, that is a success measure in itself. To go from what you love to what you love even more. And if you've done things well over the period, over a period of a publishing business, I don't think this is something you need to worry too much about at the beginning. It's more something that happens as you move on. And if you've done things well before, that you're going to come to this point sooner or later. But it's too easy to hold on to things just because you like them. I just know that if I don't do this, I'm going to keep on doing what I have been doing, which wouldn't be a terrible life by any means. But I have things I want to do and I won't be able to do them. And I know that will ultimately be something I regret, and I don't want to have any regrets.
Yeah, I was thinking then, I mean, one is that there's a book called Quit by Annie Duke that I think we talked about like a year ago when I think this first came up. So that's good. But also a quote by Annie Dillard, I just looked it up, which is like, how you spend your day is how you spend your life. So another way of finding out what you really love is how are you spending your time already? So, for example, one of the reasons I know I don't want to do short form video is I do not consume any short form video anywhere.
Brilliant.
So if I don't, but I listen to podcasts every day. So it makes sense and I read fiction every day. I listen to audiobooks. And so the things are like, what are we already doing, regardless of whether it is part of our job in inverted commas or not? And then that's the thing to, I guess, lean into, which is how are you already spending your time and what can you lean into there? And then all the things that you say, oh no, I should be doing that. That's the stuff to maybe get rid of.
That's really great advice. And another title that was helpful to me in this process, and I do feel I'm, well along with it now compared to when we talked about some of this a few months ago, was 10x is easier than 2x.
Yeah. Great book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really great book. Now, I'm not looking particularly to 10x income, but I am looking to 10x influence and impact in certain areas and certain things that I haven't been focusing on. So that was really helpful to me as well. If I think about it in terms of the expansion, rather than thinking too much about what I'm letting go and just realize, well, that was that stage, that period. And almost like, you have a new project, you move on to a new project. But we move on to new ways of doing things as well. Move on to a new process is as big an adventure in a way as, creating new content.
Yeah, well, just for people, that 10x is easier than 2x. It's basically saying you have to change your processes and your business if you want to make 10x money or 10x impact or whatever. You can't keep doing the same thing, and you have to sort of make a bigger shift. And I guess from the business, because we talk about business on this show, we've seen this for authors. Certainly I saw it in my earlier career when I went from sort of, maybe 4 figures to 5 figures, 6 figures. There's those jumps there where you really do go up as you change your business. And then we know that authors who are making 7 figures have completely changed their business model from somebody who's, at the beginning, I guess. And so it is so interesting how you can't just keep flogging the same horse if you want to really change things.
Unless you really enjoy riding out every day, which is also a perfectly acceptable place to kind of find yourself. So this is really about when you want to make that sort of change in a very conscious way, which is kind of where I find myself right now. I expect it will settle down again in a while and become, there'll be a new normal kind of thing.
Yeah. So I guess one of the big changes in the indie community over the last few years has really been a bigger use of crowdfunding and Kickstarter. And that's what I'm doing at the moment as we record this, from the 1st to the 15th of September 2025, depending on when you're listening to this. I'm running my latest Kickstarter for The Buried and the Drowned, which is a short story collection. And we talked about that in our last episode, the writing side of it. And I wanted to mention it because in terms of the publishing business, is this windowing strategy. That's what it's actually called by people who do this type of thing professionally. So windowing strategy for people listening. And what it means is, instead of putting everything out at the same time, which is what indies have tried to do for years, you are doing so this is the special hardback and all the other formats as well, but a signed special edition and the early release of the other formats in this window for backers only. So between September and October, only backers are going to get access. Then looking at releasing on my Shopify store, so jfpennbooks.com, and only after that, so December 1st, I think I've put the pre-orders up on the wide stores and the library stuff and all of that. So we call it windowing because you've got a window for sort of your biggest fans, and that's the point where you're going to make the most profit. Then the next one, going wide, but going wide on your store. And then the third one, like going wide on all of the other retailers. I've also done it for Death Valley. After the Kickstarter, I did a stint in KU because I wanted to try that with the ebook, and then going wide everywhere. So I think this is a really interesting challenge for indie authors, because I feel like for many years we've been harping on about, you should have your audiobook and your ebook and your print book all available at the same time on, say, Amazon. And now we're really looking at releasing direct first before the wide stores and all of that. So what are your thoughts on this windowing mentality? Because you were in traditional publishing before this, and they obviously do this model.
Yeah, they do, for slightly different reasons and in slightly different ways. So, their customers, the bookstore, and they traditionally released hardback first, and sometimes through a different publisher. That was a right that was licensed out to somebody else, or hardback publisher licensed the paperback licensed to somebody else. So it kind of grew up around that really more than, I think, a conscious strategy. Though, of course, if it's a nonfiction book for libraries and things, they put the expensive one out first, and it allows one round of press, and then there will be a second round when the paperback would come. I still think there's great value in having your audiobook, ebook and paperback, standard paperback, if you like, at the same time on the stores once it does go wide, because that allows the consumer. Now I'm saying this, and it's something that you do really well, and this has not been something that I have done well, but I do think there's value in that, because it allows the reader to choose, I like audio, I'm going to get audio. Whereas before, audio came in afterwards, particularly when it was so expensive to do audio in the past. So I think, there still is value in that. But I think the great difference that has happened is that authors have become so conscious now of the direct link to readers. And I mean, you and I were talking about this absolutely, it must be more than a decade ago, about how that was the way to go. And we only got these great tools, we get more and more and more of them now as more and more services as well realise the value of the direct relationship between the author and the reader. And so crowdfunding and doing beautiful books for your fans just makes so much sense commercially and creatively as well. So I think that's great. And I think that switch in thinking about the platforms as, promoting your book rather than being your main outlet, so that they're bringing people over to you where you can get the email address and have that direct relationship. these are changes that I'm really seeing becoming embedded in the author community now for the first time. But I have a question for you. Yeah, you did as part of this, I think, I'm not sure if you've done a KU much before, but I know you did a stint on KU for this windowing strategy. I want to know, how did that go? Because again, traditionally, the advice in the indie community would be, go all in KU or don't go to KU at all, because you just frustrate people who then can't get your book in KU afterwards or whatever. So how did that all work out?
I don't think that is the discussion now. I think a lot of people who have lots of books will put a series in KU and then put it wide later on. So I feel like a lot more people are using KU for a shorter amount of time. And the reason I did it with Death Valley is because it's a standalone thriller. And mainly I just wanted to get more reviews on it. This is the biggest issue with the direct sales approach, I feel, which is you end up, like if you do a Kickstarter and you have to then ask nicely for people to go review the book later. And then if you are driving people to Kickstarter and your Shopify store, you get reviews on your Shopify store. But again, that doesn't link onto something like Amazon. So I tend to ask people if they wouldn't mind pasting reviews into Goodreads, because, if they buy on Kickstarter or my store, reviews on Goodreads eventually end up sort of in the Amazon ecosystem, especially on Amazon.com. So the reason I put Death Valley into KU was so that I could promote it and try and get downloads, because obviously the number of reviews is related to the number of downloads or sales. So I just put it in for 90 days and am now going wide with that. Actually, as it only came out yesterday. So it's like it's more of a short-term tactic for me. And I think then you use the 5 free days or whatever and put some promotion on it to get it moving. But I just think KU readers are a completely different audience. So it's more a case of just trying things out. And with a standalone, it doesn't really matter that much in terms of there's no series. I think if you have like books 1 and 2 in a series in KU and then the rest of them, you've put them wide. So then I think KU readers would be annoyed and wide readers would be annoyed. But I think if you kind of have a whole series in or out, or standalones in or out, it's not that big a deal. So I do think that has maybe changed for those authors who have a bigger backlist. It's obviously much more difficult if you only have like 1 book or 2 books, for example.
Sure. So we were talking there about crowdfunding, and we've had issues with a particular crowdfunding company here in the UK. And I know they were, they did a very good job of promoting themselves as sort of a crowdfunding organisation here, to the degree that I believe people have thought that because you are crowdfunding, they just assumed you were with Unbound, or which became Boundless. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? About, tell people a little bit about what happened. The company went into administration in March. And yeah, it was an interesting company always. I remember when they started up years ago, we looked at it and couldn't really understand the attraction at all. And so, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about Unbound?
Yeah, so as you say, they use a hybrid crowdfunding model. So the publisher is originally called Unbound, and they did kind of cherry pick authors who would go into a relationship with this publisher where they would do all the publishing. And I think what was attractive about them was that I saw Unbound books in Waterstones, so in the high street bookstores. So it was almost like they really were a hybrid who had some distribution that many indies couldn't get. But the business model was crowdfunding. So they partnered with the authors, and the authors then raised the money, which then went to this company. Then they produced the books. So yeah, earlier this year, as reported in The Guardian and other papers, Unbound went into administration. Now, we wanted to talk about this because there are a lot of publishers who go bankrupt or go into administration. And the reason this is important is because when you sign a contract with a publisher, there are clauses in the contract which say what happens to the rights and that book if certain things happen. So what seemed to happen with this is that Unbound went into administration and assigned the contract to a new company called Boundless, which was still kind of the same people. And they sort of said when money comes available, they would pay the authors. But what happened was then this other company, the new company, Boundless, also entered liquidation. And this was reported on Publishers Weekly, again, quite recently. And this is a quote from Publishers Weekly: "The liquidation eliminates any remaining hope for the authors and agents who are owed money the customers owed for pre-orders and trade creditors." So why we wanted to bring this up and why I think it's important is, one, somebody said to me, "Oh, you're crowdfunding. Oh, that means you use Unbound." And I'm like, no. Crowdfunding doesn't mean one particular publisher. And I use Kickstarter. But secondly, was to really sort of think about when you sign a contract to check especially of a small publisher, to check the clauses around what happens with liquidation or bankruptcy, or what are the words in it and how do you get your rights back? So what are your thoughts on that, and what does ALLi suggest in this situation?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons that Unbound failed is because it was operating a semi-traditional model, and it owed money. It's very, very difficult to make money now selling books, print books into bookstores, if that's your main thrust, and it seems to have been theirs. And so they were stepping in a way in with a whole sort of set of business model assumptions about how books are published that failed to notice that books were actually being published in very different sorts of ways now. And they are what we would define as a hybrid publisher. And in ALLi, and we have, various categories of sort of assisted publishing services is one category, hybrid publisher is another, and they morph in and out from each other. It's not a clear-cut line. It's quite grey, and really, really question the value of hybrid publishing as a model generally. It seems to be still very much embedded in the side of the traditional business that is failing more, and it tends to attract authors who are attracted to that side of the business and don't understand how publishing has changed and how self-publishing is best managed. So there are very, very few hybrid publishers in the ALLi recommended services directory, very few indeed. There are more on the assisted publishing end of things, but again, very, very few. So, and that is because of what you said, be careful with the contract. And when you look at the contract and you see how it is set up, you realise that A, the author will receive probably nothing or very, very little financially at the end of the process. But B, same for the publisher. It's the business model itself is flawed. So I just take the opportunity to say that ALLi can offer help with all of this, both in terms of, at the global level, we're trying to change how people think about publishing and understand more about the ins and outs of how to be a profitable publisher if you're an author. But also just at a very practical level, if you are offered a contract from a hybrid publisher, or they sometimes call themselves indie publishers, lots and lots of different names for this kind of service, but essentially they'll be asking you for some money. You will be putting in money as well. And that's what makes them hybrid. And they'll put in some money, you'll put in some money. If you have a contract from such an entity, then we can look at that for you and advise you accordingly. And then, of course, you can still decide to go with them, even if we don't think it's a great way to go, because you may have very good reasons that are not financial, which is fine, but at least it will be an informed decision.
Mm. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was how different the cash flow situation is with crowdfunding and also selling direct. So when people self-publish, let's just say with Amazon or with let's say with Amazon or Draft to Digital, for example, you're not paying anything to publish, to upload a book, let's say. So you're uploading a book, and then if a book sells, you get money later on. So you haven't had to pay for the printing or the delivery of that book. It is done and then you get some money later. But with crowdfunding and also with selling direct, you actually have to pay for the printing of the books and obviously the shipping and all of those things. Now, depending on how you have done it, so with the way that we're running Kickstarters and selling direct is the customer pays us and we pay the printer. But and this is again quoting from the Publishers Weekly, it says Unbound's crowdfunding system allowed customer pre-order funds to be used for general operations, quoted from Publishers Weekly. And that to me, so just to be specific, so let's say you run a Kickstarter and you raise $1,000. So you have $1,000 and that money comes to your bank account. Now, let's say that you have to pay your rent and your rent is $500. So you've just paid your rent and now you've got $500 left. But you still, because you've got pre-orders, now have to pay for the printing of the books and the shipping, and that's going to cost you, let's say, $700. So 700 plus 500 is 1,200. So you are now out of pocket because you used those funds for something other than what you promised, which was a print book. So it was that sentence that made me say, and I'll just read it again, Unbound's crowdfunding system allowed customer pre-order funds, so money for books, to be used for general operations. So I'm not saying they did pay their rent with it, but that's an example. Or, like we're on Zoom right now. So Zoom has a monthly fee. So that would be general operations of a business. And I wanted to bring this up in our sort of business chat because I feel like many authors can learn from this cash flow management problem. And one of the main reasons businesses fail in general is cash flow. So they have, let's say, monthly expenses going out and the money coming in doesn't pay enough for that. So this is something to really be wary of if you're going to do any kind of business model where the money comes in, but then you still have to fulfill what is promised. We do hear of people who can't afford to do their printing, and this is an example of a publisher who couldn't, but we want to make sure that authors don't that too. So if you are running a business, doing your author self as a hobby, then of course you're going to be paying money out as everyone spends money on a hobby. But if you are going to run an author business, then at some point you should be bringing in money that pay for both your general operations as well as the printing of your books and your marketing and all of that kind of thing. So what are your thoughts on this, Orna, with cash flow management? Because it is a sort of reason a lot of businesses fail.
Absolutely. And, in the case of Unbound, Boundless, say their only money in was from those pre-orders from the bookstores, and therefore they were trying to pay for everything from that. And this is why we so often recommend for authors a business model that has multiple streams of income, because actually selling books in the quantity that allows even an indie author whose expenses are lower, generally speaking, and we're quite nimble in terms of how they can shift around, again, depending on what genre you're in and so on. And of course, there are some people who do astoundingly well, but just talking and particularly when you're starting out and in those first few years, having some other streams of income besides your book can actually be the difference between you managing to keep going as an indie to the point where things take off for you or not.
Mm. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't need to be, just breaking even is good enough for a long, long time. For many authors, and many businesses, it is just about breaking even. So we're not saying like you have to make an absolute ton of profit. But in order to have a viable business, you do need to make more money than goes out the door within that business side of things. But yeah, as you say, I've always had multiple streams of income and have always advocated that. And my book, How to Make a Living with Your Writing, has like hundreds of different ways. So we don't need to just do one thing. And I think we kind of call it sort of writing adjacent in terms of all the things around your writing. So for example, my podcast, which is, around writing, makes me money that is not reliant on book sales, which is fantastic.
Exactly. And it's about having some sort of a plan for that. And of course, you will have to put in probably some of your own money at the start, but separating that out so it becomes an actual loan from you to your business, which ultimately your business will pay back to you once you are in profit. So just being clear and having clear lines helps you to avoid what will become known now as the Unbound, Boundless problem.
Yes, exactly. So we should also say neither of us are financial people. We are not accountants. We are not lawyers. So we'll definitely get financial advice.
Exactly. Well, the UK is all about our controversy this time out. And the other thing we thought we might talk about, if we have time, is the Salt Path memoir controversy. And for those who don't know anything about that, if there's anybody left who doesn't, the Salt Path was a small travel memoir that became huge, and it was made into a movie with Gillian Anderson. And then it broke that the writer had actually not been truthful at all in telling the story, had used their situation to extract money from people, told lies about their health and all sorts of different things. So lies and secrets and deceit. And the Observer headline, how a blockbuster book and film were spun from lies, deceit and desperation. And if you want to know more, we'll have the link in the show notes. But I know that a lot of readers felt betrayed about this, and you are a memoir author, Joanna. I know you felt quite strongly about this. Yeah, what we owe our readers when we write a memoir. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about how you felt?
Yeah, so the book, The Salt Path by Raina Wynn, it's, as I have my books and travel podcast as well, it's a book that I've recommended, that many of my interviewees have recommended. It's a wonderful book. If you take the book completely separate from what has happened since, it's a wonderful book. It's well written. The story arc is incredible, from the kind of broke, homeless, dying, through doing the really long walk, the Southwest Coast Path, to then health, prosperity, happiness. Like, the story arc is perfect. And this is, I guess, the point, and why I've been thinking a lot about this, like with my travel memoir, Pilgrimage, which is painfully true. But I have been thinking about this idea of what is truth for a really long time. Now, any memoir writer is going to say that not every single thing happened in exactly that way, in exactly that order. And you might quote things that you bring up from memory, and memory versus truth is also different. So it becomes, well, where is the line? Because it's like a sliding scale. Did this actually happen? And how did it happen? And is the truth behind it real? Versus, did this person do this thing on this day, which could be more of an autobiography. So what we've been encouraged to do as memoir writers by the publishing industry, by the way that, by, I guess, editors, by other writers, is to have a strong narrative arc for the main character. And as in a memoir, you are the main character, basically. And so you have to have a strong arc. And so I guess I also, with Pilgrimage, I knew I couldn't even write the book until I had a narrative arc. So I did that. But then with The Salt Path, it's almost like the expectation for a strong narrative arc might have encouraged some of the, and again, quoting from the Observer, lies is what has been said by a big paper. And so I guess is, what do we owe our readers? And I feel like some of the unhappiness with the Salt Path is that the truth of Raina Wynn, and that's not actually her name, was shattered by these allegations, which obviously in the UK we have very strong libel laws, which is why we're being careful what we say. But this would not have been published by a British newspaper without a lot of background checks. So I feel like the betrayal is more about how people felt about that main character, her, and why we were betrayed It is interesting because I was thinking back to the other big one, which is Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which again, many people would have read. When I got to the end of that book and realised that she'd written it, decades later, I actually also did feel a little bit weird because I felt like decades brings a different view of memory. So this is a really interesting question. Orna, I mean, what do you think about this? Like, as writers, how do we draw these lines? And do you have any feelings about memoir?
Yeah, I think it's a testament to what happens in a book, isn't it? You when you give yourself over to a book and it's a true story and it's labelled as such, you have different expectations than if it's a work of fiction. And that's why in many ways writing fiction is a much lighter and easier thing to do. And I touch off this not through memoir, but because I am writing about real people and doing research, and you have the same sort of problem. How do you actually shape this material so that it's interesting? It keeps the pages turning, keeps the reader engaged. If you did actually set things out exactly as they happened in a nonfiction, a research sort of way, people would soon turn off. So that you have to take poetic license, but there is obviously a line. And I think these are things that we think about as ethical authors, which, ALLi has an ethical author kind of code to try and help us to stay within the lines, if you like. And I think this was, in my opinion, which even under our libel laws, I'm allowed to have an opinion about a book. In my opinion, this book did cross that line. And, any sort of investigation of the facts around the story show that the story that was written contained very different content and was used in a certain way to extract a certain response, financial as commercial as well as creative, to put it that way. So this is a moral question as well, moral, ethical question about what we do and don't do. And it is tricky. It's tricky sometimes to think about this, but I think motive and intention is what we use in ALLi an awful lot when we're thinking about everything, ethical publishing services as well as ethical authors. It's questions around, paying for reviews, or questions about whether a service is actually a bad actor or just incompetent. We return again and again. Yeah, we return again and again and again to the question of intent. What was the intention behind it? And the intention to tell a good story is great, but, the intention also to be fair to the reader and if we make our reader the most important person in the whole transaction of what we're doing, which is the proper place for them to be located, we are in service to the reader, then we don't go too far wrong. If we're doing something that is lying to the reader and deceiving the reader, then we have gone, beyond those guide rails. So, I mean, that's very woolly, but there's not a lot more you can say than that, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think even the fact that her name was different, that in itself shouldn't be a big deal because many writers have pen names, right? But it's strange how that became a really big deal for people because they felt that they knew this author and they thought of her as Ray or Raina. And then to learn that wasn't her name was really, it's so interesting. And I think this kind of relates to what we've talked about as well in this sort of era of AI, about doubling down on being human. And I've always been completely open about my usage of AI, and I publish my books under my own name. And, I have no problem with people having pen names or doing whatever the hell they think is ethical or right. But I wonder if we're moving into a sort of period where people are doubting more. So, for example, I saw an author the other day and I saw their website. There was no picture of them. There was nothing to kind of indicate that they were a real person. And so immediately in my head, I thought, oh, that's an AI avatar writer. So I don't know if that's just because that's the way things are right now. What do you think about this line? Like when do authors need to disclose, like, this is a pen name, or this is what I'm doing, or here's my picture, but I don't want to give my real picture, or how do we navigate that? Because it's difficult.
Yeah, all these questions are difficult for authors. There's no doubt about it. I use a pen name, and sometimes when people find out that Orna Ross is not my real name, when they meet me in person, and people are referring to me by my actual name, they're shocked. And there is, that moment of, and I think we're so used to pen names and stuff in the author community that we don't, there are people out there who don't even realise that authors use pen names. And they wonder why. Why would you use a pen name? Why won't you just be yourself? So, and there are very, very good reasons for using a pen name. But we in ALLi, and I personally, and I know you too, and lots of other authors, transparency is becoming more and more and more important for all the reasons that you have just said, because people will assume now, not just assume, have suspicion, because we're all getting so much more used to being scammed and people, trying to wheedle at best or steal money from us, all of that going on, but also people pretending to be other people. We're getting an absolute huge set of emails coming into us from all the scamming people, and then we're getting loads and loads of emails from people saying that scammers are writing to them and pretending to be us. So all of this is going on at the moment, and people are feeling a lot of deception and deceit around the place. And that's why, the old marketing sort of trio of knowing you, liking you, and trusting you is becoming more and more and more important for writers. And so, we're always talking about this, but being transparent really helps about that. Talking about, here's why I have a pen name and how that came about is enough. Having a picture, letting people hear your voice. I know voices can be cloned, but also, all the things that are human, the heart and soul of things, if you like, and being more honest and being more out there about that. That's why we also think, even though it results in hate and people sending horrible emails, if you are using AI, be honest about that, because, the truth is important. The truth is important. And the more open and transparent we can be. Now, obviously, sometimes you have to use a pen name to protect yourself, to protect others, all depending on what you're writing. There are often good reasons to have a pen name. I'm not saying you shouldn't have one. I'm not saying everybody needs full disclosure all the time, but leaning more towards the side of transparency, taking the discomfort of being open and truthful and vulnerable and all of those things it's better all round for everybody, I think. And it's also better, it's better from a moral, ethical, human perspective, and it's now becoming better from a commercial and marketing perspective also.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for this month. So we will be back again, but certainly before Christmas, we will be doing another one, give you a bit of an update. We've both got a few things happening that we will be sharing then. But until then, I guess happy writing.
And happy publishing. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Self-Publishing with ALLi, the podcast that brings you all the advice, news, and inspiration an indie author needs today. Our creative self-publishing stream is brought to you by Orna Ross's Go Creative program, helping authors harness the power of creative flow in writing and publishing. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our association and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.